of them we've already explored. We looked at the road of Ruth, the Moabitess, so we talked about that for a little while. I think Brit Hadashah sets us up. It gives us a good idea of we're supposed to live in unity with each other, and we're supposed to be diverse but yet unified. And that's a challenge from Shaul because he specifically did not want widespread conversion, so to say, for the nations of the world into Judaism. So he was very clear about that in his writings and his teachings. And so we are left in this situation where we have diversity, and in that diversity we are supposed to seek unity, no matter how different we are. So we're talking about the path of Ruth and how that particular path created the unity in a what we can call traditional way, right? And a traditional way to create unity is for her to convert, to become an Israelite in all sense, in every sense of that term. So today, we're moving on to a story of another individual in the Bible, and this coincides with our Tazria passage that talks about the Tzara'at, and coincidentally, this is what we're talking about. We're talking about Naaman. Naaman the Aramean. So we had Ruth the Moabitess, now we have Naaman the Aramean. Slightly different part of geography, but right next door, actually neighbors. So I don't know how much you know about Naaman. I don't know how much you know about Arameans. But let me ask you this question. What do you think the relationship was between Aram and Israel at that time? What do you think? How were the Moabites with Israelites in that era that we're talking about? Not so good, right? I showed you some verses about Moabites that, they're not friends. They're not friendlies. And in fact, God tells you, don't be friends with them. They're no good for you. They've already proven through their character that they are not your friends. They don't wish you well, so we don't want you to wish them well either. So what about Arameans? What is Aram, by the way? Does anybody know what Aram is? Syria, thank you. So Aram is Syria. So Syrians, knowing how Israel's relationship with Syria today, perhaps you could extrapolate of what Syria's relationship with Israel was back then.
Well, he had a Israelite slave girl.
He did have an Israelite slave girl, yeah. So Arameans did have what we call wild adventures into the land of Israel, where they would go out and capture a bunch of people and make them slaves. Take whatever they want for themselves and go back to Aram and live it up. They would have these raids, essentially, into Israel, incursions. Okay, hello, sounds familiar? Not much has changed. Incursions, capture people, take them away. Sounds familiar? Like I said, thousands of years may pass, but here we are still living with the same reality. So Naaman is a very interesting individual. He's definitely worth of studying, and Aram is worth of studying, but the road that Naaman took with Hashem is unique and different. And it is very different from the road of Ruth. And I hope that you could see what is different. So we'll start discussing it and we'll see how far we can get today. Okay? So in the Torah, of course, we should begin with Abraham revealed a successful path of faith by walking with God, by trusting him. Abraham is sort of a path with God that we understand is an example to all of us. Walking with God in faith, trusting God. And what God did is God made a berit, a covenant with Abraham. Abraham was asleep, by the way, if you remember that story. So God is making a berit. He's making a covenant, a special deal, an agreement with Abraham. And we know that Abraham himself actually took people into his clan. Now Abraham lives in this framework of a berit, of a covenant with God. And Abraham brings people in to his clan, and he actually circumcised everyone in his household for a reason. Why? Because circumcision became the sign of that berit, that covenant, that relationship with God that he had that was different from other people's relationship with God. Whatever relationship with God other people had was no longer the same as what Avram had with God. So, as he brought people into his clan, they were circumcised, they became a part of his household, kind of an extended family of sorts, if you want to think of him that way. And that was how Abraham brought people into his community of faith. Now, this path of associating with Abraham and later with his descendants is essentially the same path, the path of Ruth that we have seen. It's the voluntary proselyte conversion. It's saying, I want to be a part of your family. I want in. How can I do that? Well, for Ruth, it was very, practical aspect. She just married into the family, right? So the same thing that would be for other people. Somebody might become a servant of Abraham, right? And eventually, Abraham would say, hey, here's a nice wife for you. Stay here. Be part of us. And they become a part of a clan, an extended family. And essentially, whatever identity they might have had, wherever they might have come from, they would dissolve and become a part of Abraham's family, essentially. A new identity of a new clan. So if you remember, one of the trusted servants, was Eliezer of Damascus, right? Damascus is where? Syria. So yet he somehow was no longer Syrian, really. As time went on, Abraham considered him one of his closest people, right? So you would see how somebody would take the similar path of Ruth, even in those days, in the days of Abraham, and essentially become a part of the family. So that is something that we know about. Now, but can people simply know God as their ancestors did, as Adam and Noah knew God, without the complicated covenant terms and obligations? That's the question I have to ask. It's a big theological question. It's like one of those what ifs. Is it possible to know God in the same way that Adam knew God? Is it possible to know God in the same way that Noah knew God? We realize that Abraham had a very unique relationship, right? A covenant. God reached out to him. But is it possible for us even today to know that? Well, it is logical for us to consider, since God created everyone, there is nothing standing in the way of people simply acknowledging this relationship and reaching out to God. Would God reject someone who doesn't know him, who doesn't have a covenant, who doesn't have any special privileges or anything? Would God actually just say to that person, go away, if that person just reaches out to them in faith? Just imagine a person out there on faraway distant island, praying to God and says, Lord, I think you're real. I think you're out there. God, I think there has to be a creator because of all this creation I recognize. And if they reach out to them, even in the words that they know, maybe not perfect words, but in the best words they know how, would God actually reject them? Because, by the way to do this is to become part of the family of Abraham. What do you think? God would accept them, right? It's not difficult for us to conceive that logically, since God is the creator of all people, he's not going to limit his ways and his paths to just the family of Abraham. That he will allow some outsiders. Exactly. Why not? If a person reaches out to God and just honestly seeking, even if they don't really truly understand who God is. God revealed himself to Abraham, so Abraham knew, but we can't assume that on the part of other people. So there could be some people out there who just reached out to God directly, as Adam spoke to God, as Noah spoke to God, and however much they knew about God, we don't know. It's possible. So the story of Ruth the Moabitess who assimilates into Israel, it's as familiar, but the story of Naaman the Aramean, who demonstrates a completely different path with God, is a little bit less familiar. I don't know why. I guess people love the book of Ruth a little bit more than the books of Kings. I don't know. But here's this. Aram is a region in ancient Syria with whom Israel was in adversarial relationship, and Naaman was a high-ranking military official. So, okay, imagine that into our day. What would that look like? You have a militant forces next to Israel's border, and he just happens to be the commander of those military forces who make incursions into Israel and capture slaves and goods. So it says in 2 Kings chapter 5, verse 1, Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Aram, was a great man with his master, and highly respected, because by him, the Lord had given victory to Aram. The man was also a valiant warrior, but he was a leper. And here's that word, leper, right? Again, in English we say leprosy, but I tried to explain a little bit in my drash that we're not really talking about leprosy. We're talking about tsarat, So something is terribly wrong with him. He has a skin condition that is indicative of something rotting on the inside of him. And the man is a warrior. He's achieved this general status in the army. He's the commander. And it says right here that by him the Lord had given victory to Aram. Can you think of why would Hashem give a victory to the enemy of Israel? Why? Why would that happen? Disobedience. Exactly. Hashem actually told us, as the terms of the covenant are explained in the Torah, in Dvarim, it says, if you turn away from me, I will let your enemies triumph over you. So, it's quite literally, the reason why Naaman is successful is because Israel is disobedient to God. There's something that the people of Israel are doing wrong. There's something that the king or whatever contingency in the within Israel's society that's doing so wrong that Hashem says they need to see the error of their ways, and the only way they're going to see this is if I allow their enemies to have victory over them. They weren't able to do that all the time, but at this time I'm going to let Naaman to be the victorious man. He's going to be great man in Aram, and guess what? He's going to be loved by the king, but in the end, the book of Kings tells us that it was God who was giving them victory. And in the middle of all that, even though he's a warrior, he's a leper. He has this tzarat. So the book of Kings describes this interesting dynamic of Israel's unfaithfulness, and God is working through this pagan, essentially. Israel needs repentance. That's the story. Now, the most notable fact about Naaman in the biblical story, of course, is that despite his victories, he's a leper. That's what we just said. And this condition was seen always as a terrible condition, a curse. There was no healing for it. There was no medicine that would work. If it was leprosy, leprosy is commonly referred today as Hansen's disease. You can actually cure it with a dose of antibiotics. It's fairly easily treatable today. Back then, they didn't have antibiotics, so of course it would not have been curable back then. But the point that you have to understand about Tzarat, why does it happen? What is it done about it? What Torah tells us is this is something that from Hashem. It is a punishment from Hashem. Just like the victory that Arameans have, essentially, is a punishment upon Israel, the Tzarat is a punishment upon Naaman.
Do you think that the skin condition that Naaman had was the same as what's described in the Torah portion this week and next?
I don't know. I have to assume that we're talking about the same thing because the language is the same, but I don't know. We know so little about Tzarat, let's put it that way, of why these things happen, how they happen. We don't have a lot of answers. We have a lot of guesses. We have a lot of tradition. But we're not always there, yeah.
Even if it was the same thing, it just seems weird because he's not isolated. He's not, being put out of the camp and having to go with his head unshorn and shout unclean, unclean.
Well, yeah, but those are Israelite rules.
Yeah, right.
I mean,
which begs the question: is it the same?
Is it even Tzarat? Yeah, we don't know. What we do know that there was a whole slew of different kinds of skin conditions that would have been considered or suspected to be Tzarat when literally your flesh is rotting, essentially. That's what happens. It's a terrible thing, but it's possible that something else would have been. People did not diagnose things that easily back in those days. So, yes.
I think Hashem's writing it in the scriptures because he's talking about how far Israel has fallen. Not only do we have a foreigner, but we have a foreigner with a disease that's supposed to be isolated. And if we interpret it from a Torah perspective, how unclean he was, and he was the one making judgment upon Israel, right. Or the tool about which Hashem was using to make judgment upon Israel.
Right. So here, Anthony, you're hitting on something really important, and this is the spiritual aspect of reading these words. We have a victory that's given over Israel to a person who himself is like in this cursed condition, right? Being stricken with this terrible disease, yet Israel must be doing so bad that it's a person like that who gets to have victory over them, essentially. And that person gets to walk around and claim, sort of say, the victory and say those sorts of things. So on a spiritual level, the story is really bad for Israel, is what I'm trying to say. And you're pointing that out. Thank you for highlighting that idea.
I wonder, because it doesn't say when he contracted the leprosy, because there are all sorts of writings in the prophecy in the Torah that says, if you don't obey, then your enemies will prevail over you. But woe to their hand that strikes. So even though God allows it, they're still cursed for being the ones who do it. So I wonder if it's directly related. I don't know. We can't know, but it's a thought.
I think it's a really good thought. I mean, and that's what I want you to see. There's a lot of a spiritual dynamic in this situation. The fact that he's a leper is a reflection of what's going on in his life. But then Israel is in that similar sort of say condition. And so while there's chastisement that's going on, the person who is doing the chastising is actually no better, maybe worse, we don't know. But he's clearly stricken with this terrible disease, which actually eventually eats you alive. That's why people were so scared of this, because it doesn't go away. There's no cure for it. There's not a balm you can put in it. There's not a medicine that you can sprinkle or do anything just to make it go away. Nothing is known in the history to work for it. While some skin diseases could be, I guess, medicated in some ways, this one was resistant to any sort of medicine. Yeah, it's a flesh-eating bacteria, so or something like that. We don't really know what it was, again, because Torah is not a medical textbook. And it doesn't give us these types of terminology like flesh-eating bacteria. The ancients didn't know about bacteria or anything like that. So, yeah, so Torah uses very simple language to describe these conditions that we perceive to be medical conditions. But please understand that in the ancient Jewish perspective, how the ancient Jews saw this, all sickness comes from God. He's the striker. He strikes us with sickness, and then he could choose to strike us with wellness. Both healing and disease come from the same source. And I know that's a tough one to embrace, but remember how I told you that God is the source of good and evil. You gotta believe that one, because that's the ancient worldview. People want to believe what they want to believe, but Torah paints us that picture that both the striking and the healing comes from God.
The other thing too we need to consider with this is that it also can happen on the walls of the home and in clothes, and that's something that's a little different than
Right, Sarah Ott, Hansen's disease, walls of the house are not susceptible to Hansen's disease, right? So we know that. We know that today. And antibiotics are also not going to help. Remember the Torah says to do what with a house? Try to do something, but then tear it down. That's it. It's irredeemable. Like, this is it. So there's something terribly wrong in this house if it needs to be torn down. Do you know how much effort it takes to build a house? I mean, today with the power tools and everything, it takes a lot of effort. But imagine in those days how much effort it took to build a house. And you're going to tear it down? That's a lot of work. But so let's just consider the spiritual aspect of the story. I think there's a lot in there. So we read Leviticus 13, so I'm not going to reread it. That's definitely something that's fresh in our minds because it's in our parsha right now. And so, but remember, Naaman, he does not know Leviticus. That's not his world. That's Israelite world. And at that time, perhaps some Israelites don't even know Leviticus. They don't even know the laws because some of them are not really following God's ways. So these are the days of Elisha, and so Israel was not entirely close to God at that moment. So the separation and the distance in the Torah were not really to contain the disease, but to demonstrate the need for cleansing and repentance on the part of the person who was affected with this condition that people call leprosy. In ancient Israel, lepers or metzorot, they were treated just like all other ritually unclean people. It's not, people again did not believe in contagious diseases, and if we're not talking about Sara'at being contagious, I told you the priests were to examine the Metzora multiple times. And if we're talking about a highly communicable disease, why would you want to expose Aaron to that? And his sons, by the way. yeah, take out all of the important people from the leadership of Israel by exposing them to the worst possible contingent. No, you don't do that. So that's why we know that we're not talking about that. We're talking about some other kind of element that is truly has spiritual causes, and it's for that person in particular, and it's not like you're going to get it from and contract it. So the separation of the person is not quarantine. It's not quarantine like we think of quarantine with a disease. It's a separation so the person can take a pause and say, what's wrong with me? Why is this happening to me? Why am I unclean? Why am I out of the camp? And most of the time, these sorts of things, the tradition tells us, is because of how we treat other people. So if I'm separated from the people, guess what? My ongoing treatment of these people is cut off. I can't abuse somebody if I'm not there to abuse them. If I'm removed from the equation, I cannot continue being terrible and mean to them. So the distance is not necessarily a medical need. There's a spiritual need for that distance. And that's what I want you to know. So right there in Numbers we read, command the sons of Israel, they send away from the camp every leper and everyone having a discharge and everyone who is unclean because of a dead person. So sending away from the camp also is a spiritual aspect of being removed from the presence of God. What happened is the camp is where the Israelites are, and in the middle of the camp is what? A Mishkan, a holy place. A place where God in His glory dwell. So you remove the people to the periphery of that so that they realize that they have just entered into a danger zone of being on the outside. And God does not want that in His presence because His presence is holy and special. And so, yes, temple can become contaminated in the sense of defiled with sin and impurity of all sorts. And that's why we have so many laws in the Torah that speak about purity and cleansing, and we have all these rituals. God takes these things seriously, even if we don't. He does, so it's important to Him. So either we adopt His way of looking at the world, or we can choose not to, but that's what He wants. Yes, Wendy?
And the Torah specifically says that these people that are on the outskirts of the camp, they're doing that so that they don't die when they approach the tent meeting as well.
You're absolutely right. So that they don't die. Thank you for pointing that out. That's an excellent point. When we are inconsiderate to God's holiness, we can bring damage upon ourselves, even to the point of death. Being disrespectful of God's holy place can bring on death, not just sickness, but actual death. So that, yeah, this is to protect them from the wrath of God, so to say. Why? Because God's place cannot be desecrated. It's holy, and it's holy for Him, and His holiness is way more important. So human mortality kind of takes a different stance there. So hopefully the whole aspect of Tzaraat is a little bit more clear for us. So it's a terrible, terrible affliction. I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to skip these notes here. Let me skip through the Tzaraat notes. I think we got that pretty good. So the story goes that Naaman's Israelite servant girl, remember that he has a slave that he's captured from Israel. She informs him that there's a prophet in Shomron, in Samaria. And this prophet can actually heal leprosy. Okay? So this is like saying the world has an incurable disease and there's somebody who actually can handle it. So the commander relays this to the king. Hearsay, this is gossip, just from his servant girl, right? Who in turn sends a letter with a very large sum of money to Israel's king. To do what? To buy the medicine, procure the healing. If there is a prophet who could do this, if there's a shaman, if there's a holy man, or whatever you want to call him, the Arameans don't care. I am going to pay for this because this person, Naaman, he's important for me. So he says that he departed and took with him 10 talents of silver and 6,000 shekels of gold and 10 changes of clothing. So that's 2 Kings 5:5. Now, this translates to the modern language of 750 pounds of silver, roughly about 340 kilos, 150 pounds of gold. When was the last time you saw that? About 68 kilos, plus 10 sets of clothes. What you need to carry away from this is that this is an outrageous amount of money. This is an overpayment. I mean, this is like the country's national debt right there. Okay? This is what we're talking about. It's a massive amount of money. Even for a king of Aram, who is a sovereign, who has all this stuff that he's been robbing from Israel, by the way. So look at that as some of that returning back to Israel's economy, right? Except he sends it to the king, not to the people. But this is an outrageous amount of money. So why is he doing that? Because he wants to buy the healing. He wants to buy it. In his mind, this is perfectly acceptable. You have something I want, I give you the amount of money that you can't possibly say is not enough. It's like me coming to your house and I say, ooh, I like your car. And you're like, yeah, it's a nice car. How about $1 million for it? And you're like, $1 million? Sure, let me get the title. let's get this done. Let's get this on paper. You're like, sure, you want to buy my car for $1 million? I'll sell you my old car for $1 million. Definitely overpaying. So you'd think, who would refuse such a deal, right? But the king of Israel has a different reaction. Israel's king saw this as a provocation to war. He actually says, oy vey, what are we going to do? He knew that only God could reverse Tzaraat, and that no amount of money would help. So the king panics. He literally freaks out in the story. He does not know what to do. Unlike pagans, Israelites knew that God cannot be appeased or manipulated with any amount of money. I don't care how many millions of dollars you offer me for whatever it is that you want from me. God is not going to be manipulated with that. That's not going to happen. But you see, pagans don't know that. That's not how their religion works. So the king panics because he realized no matter the amount of money you give me, I actually can't deliver it to you because the healing doesn't belong to me. It's not like I can say, do this, Elisha. And Elisha says, yes, sir. And he does it. The healing actually comes from Hashem, not from a prophet, right? The prophet is the channel, but it comes from Hashem. So Prophet Elisha, he calmed down the king in the story because he saw an opportunity to show the Arameans the power of Israel's God. The God of Israel is merciful, and he can heal even Israel's adversaries if he chooses to do so. That's what Elisha understood. Meanwhile, the king sent Naaman to Elisha. So money has come. Now comes the delegation of the sick person, which he's supposed to receive the healing, of course. Naaman came to the prophet, but curiously, the prophet did not come out to meet him. He didn't even come out of his house. There's a theme of rejection that I hope you catch on to. Perhaps it's a deliberate rejection, an intent to ignore Naaman in the story to kind of test his resolve. I don't know why Elisha did not come and out even say hello, because he expects that the prophet will come out, wave his hands, right? We read that, we read today, our Haftarah. And he didn't come out, he didn't wave his hands, he didn't say God's name, he didn't do anything special or magical to heal this person. So Naaman is terribly disappointed that the prophet doesn't even come out of the door to meet him. After all these overtures that are made by his government, way over the top amount of money, and he doesn't come out.
Of course, keep in mind, Naaman is a very arrogant military commander.
Of course.
And also, my understanding through the years that Elisha was not going to jump into the protocol or like Abraham told the king of Sodom, you're not going to make me rich is what it is. So Elisha knows that God is working here.
Well, Elisha doesn't want money. He doesn't care about money. That's not something that he actually even concerned about. But again, to another person on the other side, money is what it's all about. It's all about wealth and power. And so Elisha, he sees this as an opportunity to do something else. Like I said, he sees this as an opportunity of God possibly extending his mercy even to the enemies. Now, how powerful would that message be? So they want to buy it. And he says, there isn't the money you can pay. So Elisha sent a messenger to Naaman saying, "Go and wash in Jordan River 7 times, and your flesh will be restored to you, and you will be clean." But Naaman was furious, and he went away. So that's how the story goes. So that he doesn't come out, he actually sends a messenger, okay? And then he asks him to do something stupid, like wash in the muddy rivers of Jordan. I mean, I don't know if you've been to Jordan, lately. I mean, I assume it wasn't that much cleaner than what it is today, especially downstream from Syria. Right? I mean, this is downstream from Syria. Do you understand that? This is what we're talking about. So that's why he's so mad. Because, you want me to go down the stream and wash in this little thing, and somehow I'm going to be clean? So he's going to get upset. He's going to say some very nasty things. He's furious. He's actually so angered, he doesn't know. I mean, he's an important person. He paid all this money. Give me my cure. And he says, go wash in this muddy Jordan River. 7 times. Not just once, not just twice. 7 dips. What exactly was Naaman so upset about? I don't know if you ever thought about it. Why did he become so angry? What did he find so unacceptable about prophet's direction to wash in a river? Well, Naaman's anger appears to be a bit of an overreaction. Why is he furious? It's a simple request, right? So go dip yourself into this water, even if you don't like it. If that's what's at stake, well, do you want your flesh to rot? To fully understand Naaman's reaction, we need to understand Naaman's worldview. This is where I think there's a lot of disconnect between us and the ancient people. There's something very cultural in these words that's going on that modern readers are often not aware of. So the prophet's direction to Naaman is simple, but it's actually simple only on the surface. We got to go beyond the skin, deeper. And then I want you to understand there's a relationship between God, people, and land. You have already seen this relationship. When Ruth says, your God will be my God, your people will be my people, right? I will live where you live, and I will die where you die. That dynamic of God, people, and land, these 3 parts, they all play into the words of Ruth. The kind of commitment that she makes to God is really circulated around these 3 ideas. And this is how people saw the world back then. They saw this dynamic. God, land, and people are actually inseparable. You can't say that this God has no land. He has to have a land. And you can't say that this God has no people because he has to have a people. If he has a land, he has people living in that land. You can't have, that dynamic cannot be broken. And either way you go, you're still going to keep circling that triangle. And you're going to have God, land, and people. So when Ruth says what she says, it's actually quite meaningful. And we'll see this as we think about Naaman and what he says, that dynamic actually still working. So here's something to consider. The relationship is this. The way people relate to God is they bring him sacrifice, thanksgiving, they worship, right? They acknowledge him as their God. In turn, God sends blessing and rain upon the land. And that land is now fertile. It produces all this harvest, which then contributes to the well-being of the people. And then the people, in return, do what? Offer God's thanks and a sacrifice. And then God sends more rain and more harvest, and the circle just keeps on going. This is a relationship. And once you understand of how this works, this is actually the system of ancient worship, and that's how it was built on. The entire system of worship in Mishkan is built around that type of relationship. So understand the dynamic. Hopefully that's super clear because I made it so easy. How about this? What is land without water? What if your land looks like that? Do you think there's something broken in this relationship? Yeah. Because God is not sending the rain. He's not making the harvest. He's not giving you the fertility of the land. As a result, the people go hungry, and as a result, what are they going to offer to God? What kind of thanksgiving and praise or sacrifices can they even bring off of that piece of land? Not much, right? don't have really much to offer, if that's what your land really looks like. And that's what land without water would look like. So that relationship is super important. And once we understand it, it actually works quite well. So now that brings us to the next step of understanding that relationship. That rivers, in an ancient Israelite conceptual thinking, they are divine channels of blessing. What fills the rivers is rain. God is the one who sends the rain. And if God does not send the rain, then the blessing becomes a trickle of a blessing. But if God sends lots of rain, then the blessing becomes this big, widespread river that tends to irrigate all the land. And that essentially gives you harvest and blessing and produce, which then you turn to God. As Thanksgiving and praise, you have this festival that you celebrate, and you bring your harvest to the Lord, and you offer it. Why? Because He's blessed you so much, He's given you so much, you can't possibly even eat that much. You don't need that much. He gave you more than you can possibly consume. So, rivers are divine channels of blessing. Now remember what Naaman is being asked to do. He's being asked, go and dip yourself 7 times into Jordan. Into Jordan River he's supposed to go. Who owns Jordan River? This is God's land. This is Israel. This is Israel's God. This is Israel's river. This is Israel's land. The relationship of God, land, and people. River Jordan. And he's supposed to enter into that. And now he needs to identify with that. And that is how he's going to get his healing. His healing is going to have to come through the channels of blessing that belongs to the God of Israel, and it is connected to the land of Israel, and is connected to the people of Israel. But hello, do you remember who Naaman is? He's the enemy of Israel. But he needs a healing, and the only way he's going to get it is if he actually receives the blessing of Israel's God that is connected to their land and to their people. That's why he's furious. That's why he's so upset. Because he's being asked to do something he does not want to do as a military commander of a foreign army that's supposed to be at war with Israel. Make sense? This is complicated. Naaman did not expect that he would be told to do something which could appear, and it would appear, as an act of worship directed to Israel's deity. That is how he saw the 7 washings of Jordan. To him, that would be acknowledging Israel's deity, which he did not want to. He has his own God. This could be seen as an act of national betrayal. He came to purchase the blessings of Israel's God, to pay for healing, not to worship Israel's God, to get those things. So he says, not Abana and Farar, the rivers of Damascus, better than the rivers of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? Like, why do I have to do it here? Can I go back home and wash? Can I do that at home, back in Damascus? And the answer is no. You want the healing from our God, you wash in our river, connected to our people, our land. He doesn't want to do that. That's why he's upset. Because what he's being asked to do is pledge allegiance to the flag of the country which he does not want to serve. Right. To the God that he does not want to worship. He's stuck in a very difficult place. He wants the healing. He does not want to do this. And some people come and reason with him, right? They tell him, look, General, you were asked to do a simple thing. If prophet would have asked you to do something really complicated, like build this huge tower or whatever, you would have done it. He's asking you to do something simple and you're so mad about it. Just go dip in the river. They're being reasonable, right? There's always good, reasonable people sometimes around us. When you're having a hard time, turn to other reasonable people and see what they say. They're being good to him. They're asking him to go wash in a river. So it's a battle. It's a battle for Naaman and his pride and inability of him to basically humble himself and go into the waters of Jordan. He'd rather wash in his own river, of his own God, at home. So initially, Naaman refused, but then he finally humbled himself. And when he did, and he did exactly what the prophet asked of him, the leprosy, the tzara'at, this affliction that was upon him, it vanished. Naaman returned to Elisha and he said, "Behold now, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So please take a present from your servant now." But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will take nothing." And he urged him to take it, but he refused. Naaman doesn't get it. He still wants to pay for it. Now he wants to pay after the fact. See, he already has the healing. He already received the reprieve that he was asking for, regardless of the money. And he says, "Okay, so would you take the money now after? Can you bill, now that the bill is, can I send the bill and can I pay that bill afterwards, after treatment?" No. He says, "I don't want money. It's, it's a present now. Can you take it as a present?" "No, don't want it. I will take nothing." So, of course, you know the story of Gehazi later on. He does take money, right? So we're not going to go into that one because that's a little side trail. But please understand what's going on here. Naaman's still not getting it. What Israel's God is giving it to him is given completely free. Healing is like that. Can't pay for it. If he pays anything for it, if he gives a gift before or after, it would invalidate the grace and mercy and the kindness that he has received. So, as a result, he says no.
It's because Hashem can't be purchased.
That's right.
Yeah.
The sacrifices are within you,
That's right.
not within your pocket.
You're right.
And that's-
You are the sacrifice.
Right,
Exactly.
and the same principle applies in Revelation about the water. In the end, when the nations don't come up in Sukkot to worship, that the water will be showing that He is the God of all the earth. And so, judgment, like you were saying, what you were saying, in the ancient times, the water was a sign of judgment.
Yeah. Water is judgment, water is blessing.
Yeah.
Lack of water is judgment. Laura?
So basically, Elisha's request was out of the norm for him mentally, because that the societal norm at the
Right.
time basically was that that's what you do when you go to the temples.
Yeah.
So it basically broke the protocols that he was used to when serving a god. So he thought that Israel's God was the same as the Syrian God, which was
Right.
incorrect. And the fact that he was being ignored by the prophet really sparked an intense anger and
That's right.
yeah, so it was
You're
both emotional and he broke the cultural standards of the time and religious standards. So
Everything
that's-
is wrong in this story.
Yeah.
Everything is wrong in this story. But that's what's necessary for Naaman to make that statement later on. I know that Israel's God is the only God. I mean, this is big. This is a pagan who was angry a few minutes ago. This is a big change. I mean, please, this is a miracle. Don't undermine that. We read these stories. Put yourself in this situation. This is a big turnaround. I know there's no God in all the earth but in Israel. So just please take this as a present. No presents necessary. He refuses him. And that just goes on. So the pagan military commander had this complete transformation. We could see that. He now believed in Israel's God, who is merciful even to Israel's adversaries. And the healing was free. And he urged the prophet to accept the payment. Elisha refused, but the Naaman asked then for a favor. Okay, if you're not going to take my money, then I have a favor. He still wants something more. Here's a good one. If not, all right, I'll take it that you want my money. Please let your servant at least be given 2 mules load of earth for your servant will no longer offer burnt offerings, nor will he sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. He's only going to worship Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh now, okay? Only Hashem. But in order to do that, he needs 2 mules loaded up with dirt. And remember what I told you about this relationship between God, people, land. So what he really wants is 2 mules of Israel's soil. And it seems like a strange request, but given this worldview that we understand, ancient deities are tied to the land. He wants to take a little piece of Israel with him back to Aram. He wants, if he is going to have the continued blessing and continued relationship with Israel's God, He literally wants to take a little piece of Israel with him home so that he can sacrifice standing on the soil of Israel. So that's why he wants 2 mules loaded up with dirt from Israel. It's a strange request, but that's what he wanted. He wanted to have an embassy of Israel's God at home in Aram so he could continue to seek this God's blessing. And again, if you understand the mindset of that ancient person, now you understand his unreasonable request is a purely common, absolutely makes sense, reasonable type of thinking. If you didn't understand that before, now, right there. And of course, Naaman had another issue that he knew might cause a problem when he returned home. And this is the difficulty with the path of Naaman. He says this in verse 18. Regarding this matter, may the Lord forgive your servant. When my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow down in the house of Rimmon. When I bow down in the house of Rimmon, may the Lord please forgive your servant in this matter. See, Naaman had to explain to Elisha how he would have to pretend that he still worshipped the Aramean national deity, along with the king, and he asked for forgiveness for this hypocrisy at a time, assuming that the Lord, would be his true God. He says, I am making this choice to worship Israel's God, but I'm going to be caught in a real pickle when the king goes to worship Rimmon. And Hadad Rimmon was a thunder deity, okay, kind of like Baal. He was god of thunder, kind of like Zeus with a lightning bolt. So he says, when he goes to worship him, I'm going to have to play along. And I'm asking right now for forgiveness ahead of time. That's what he's asking. Of course, Elisha responded to him in a very positive way, but this is a problem of anyone who does not choose a path of Ruth. This is going to be a problem of the path of Naaman, and it's going to play out for other people throughout history in a very similar way. They're going to come into a conflict of interest, conflict of culture, conflict of deities that he's going to have to live with. Because he's going back home to Aram, he's going to have to deal with it. So Naaman's path is not easy. Worshipping the God of Israel outside of Israel can cause conflicts with the surrounding culture, and that will have loyalties, and people might even turn hostile towards him. So religious loyalties that are different from those of the rest of the people can become a point of conflict. Naaman knew this, and I think you know this, you realize this, that religious loyalty different from other people who surround you will cause problems to you. Elisha understood Naaman's sincere heart, and he dismissed him with the Israelite farewell of shalom. That's what it says. And he said to him, go in peace. So he went some distance from him. So Naaman had a path, but a difficult path. What I want you to realize is how different this particular path that he was taking with God was from the path of Ruth. Ruth decided to alleviate these problems by simply becoming a part of Israel, by moving to Israel, and she wouldn't have to explain to people what she believes differently and why she doesn't worship the same God as Moabites do, and why she can't bring that sacrifice or this sacrifice or anything like that. She wouldn't have to deal with any of that stuff. Why? Because she's not going to be outnumbered. She's not going to be the odd one standing out there who's not like everyone else. So she chose this path, and Naaman, he took a different path. Naaman's path to Israel's God could not have been more different than Ruth's. There's no question that he clearly experienced the power of God. He did. We can't deny it. He understood that experience to be a demonstration of God's power. He says, there's only one God, and it's Israel's God. No questions about it. This is not Rimmon masquerading as the deity of Israel. He's like, this is God of Israel that's healing me. So just like Ruth, he clearly articulated his faith. This is a beautiful statement of faith that he's making right there in the book of Kings. He possessed the proper conviction that Israel's God is a very real God, and he deserves Naaman's devotion. He deserves his worship, in fact, exclusive worship. He realizes why it's a problem that he's going to have to continue to pretend to worship other gods. But some things were very different for him. So Ruth was willing to move to Israel. He was not. Ruth wanted to make Naomi's people and forsake her own family her people and serve Naomi's God. Naaman does not show the same level of commitment to Israel. That's the difference. In his own way, he expressed his faith differently. He said, your God will be my God, but my people will be my people. See what difference it is? And that's a different path. That is a second path. That is a different path from Ruth's path. And that road, when a person believes in Israel God but retains their cultural identity, is a much more difficult road. And there is no expectation in that story that Naaman should do otherwise, by the way. Elisha does not tell him, what? You mean you're going back to Aram? Are you a Meshuggah? I have a nice house right here for you. Why don't you just move in next door and go to my school? You could be the student of the prophet. No, he doesn't say that. He fully expects that he will return to Aram, and he has his own path of faith, and he proclaims this belief, and Elisha realizes that that's what he's supposed to do. Was there an option for him to do that, by the way? Hypothetically, could Naaman say, you know what? I'm staying. Could he say that? Yeah, of course he could. And he was a wealthy, powerful man. He probably could have relocated to Israel if he wanted to. Wouldn't be a problem. But he chose not to. He chose not to leave all that behind. He chose to go back to his people. And that came with difficulties.
They're coming from very different places. So Ruth was married to a Jewish man, already part of that family, basically. And then she decided to go all in.
Right.
He was at a high level in the government, connected to the king of his country, and it was, he had more to give up.
Yeah, he had a lot more to give up. And what I want you to realize is there's no expectations for him to give that up. I don't want you to think that the path of Ruth is the only right one. Because apparently the path of Naaman is a possibility. It's not that God said, all right, I'm done with you. Since you didn't decide to move to Israel and renounce Aram, I'm done with you. I can imagine that he probably lived on in Aram for many, many years, worshiping the God of Israel and continuing to enjoy the blessings of being healed from Tzara'at. I'm pretty sure that Tzara'at probably did not return to him. So there's nothing in the story for me to assume that Naaman is doing anything wrong whatsoever, because Elisha actually tells him, go in peace. Go with shalom. It's okay. The path that you're choosing is a good path. Definitely better than a path that you came on with. So you can understand the transformation has happened, and there's more than one way of traveling along this path with God. So in summary, let me say this. Naaman embraces Israel's God, but he retains his existing national identity, and he retains his loyalty to his people, even though they are in an adversarial relationship with Israel. That's a tough one for us to understand, but that's how it happens. Naaman recognizes that the land and the people of Israel are holy, and the relationship that they have with God is special and unique, even if some of them have, less conviction than he does. That's important to understand. He seeks a tangible connection through the land of Israel to the blessings and the favor of Israel's God. Hence, his request for dirt to take home.
There seems to be someone like him all through history. Like even during the Shoah, there were people like Oskar Schindler, for example, who was a Nazi,
right?
Who was a spy for Germany before the war even started, and yet he saved 1,200 Jewish people and bankrupted himself.
Right. And you can't deny the fact that he did that, because it's all documented, it's all real.
So
it's not like, oops, I accidentally saved 1,200. No, like I went bankrupt saving these people, and it doesn't matter. So yeah, there are people like that throughout history. And please understand, Oskar Schindler didn't convert to Judaism. He's buried in Jerusalem, in the valley of the righteous Gentiles. He's buried there. But he never converted to Judaism.
Yeah. I was going to say that it's not written, so we never know what Hashem used with him for the protection of Israel not to go to war because he was at such a high level. I mean, there's no telling what he done, just like Schindler's thing.
Right.
And the other thing I thought about was Isaiah 58. It talks specifically about the one who is of the nations, who keeps the Sabbath, who does the things of Israel, but still remains of the nations, that their name in the end of days, their name will be greater. Schindler's name, he's in Jerusalem, his name is greater than, people remember his name more than they remember some of Israel's soldiers who have passed away in the time of war. Absolutely. And his name would be greater. And I think a lot of times that I always refer people back when we get into identity issues, is that at the temple, the court of the Gentiles is far greater and bigger and full of people that are not Jews.
That's right.
And it was always there for the souls of those who want to worship Hashem.
I want you to see this as a legitimate path, as a legitimate road with God. We can't delegitimize it because it's not like Ruth, because we kind of romanticize Ruth's path, essentially, is what I want to say. And so Naaman's path is good. It's really a fruitful one.
I think I read this somewhere, but it always stuck with me. The thing about him, too, is he was willing to listen. Yes. He was willing to listen to his servant girl, a slave. And then when he's in a fury, his servants go to him.
Right.
And so, I know for sure, but it does seem like they actually loved him. Like they cared about him.
He was a good master.
But he didn't think, you don't know anything, I'm in charge. And he listened to them. I mean, based on her word, he did all this.
Right.
And then based on what the servants pleaded with him, he did. He was willing to do that. I think to be teachable, to be open, to go against your worldview, that's...
Shows you something about his character. So I think it's important for us to understand that the character, and perhaps this is what Elisha knew about his character, that he would be that kind of a person. Again, we don't know, but God discloses these things to the prophet, and you can see it. So, by the way, what Anthony said about the aftermath of all this, what came out of all this, if you keep reading 2 Kings, you will actually say that the Aramean army stopped making raids into Israel after that. That's what it says, actually. They fed them, by the way, too. They're like, hey, let's get the food out, feed the military. They fed them, and after that, they stopped attacking Israelites. Like, all of a sudden, things changed.
It reminds me of listening to this story of myself, of the simple things we could do, and yet we want to make it grander or harder than it really is. If God asks us to do something, what's in your hand? Use that instead of all these other things that I need to do this and that and the other thing before I can do that. Just do it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Mom. It really is. Like, sometimes we expect too much. We're like, well, is this it? I want to do something bigger and more important than that. It was really a simple request, but it did make him upset because, like Laura said, he broke every rule out there. All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's a good one. Yeah, yes, Laura.
Just really quickly, I like that there's ceremony in both instances. So ceremony matters.
Yes.
At the end of it all, it may not be the ceremony you want or you expect. He expected a different kind of ceremony. He still had to do a ceremony.
Yes.
And it's all meaningful. The water, the 7 times, it's still ceremony.
He had to worship in a
With
very
ceremony.
specific way.
Ceremonial.
Yeah, ceremonial worship. That's what it is. I mean, look, we do these things. We do all these actions. We raise a cup. We say the Kiddush, right?
Yeah.
We're getting ready to do that right now.
But
Why do we do that?
but
Can we
people
just
nowadays-
gulp it? Yeah. Or we can say and bless God's name before we do that.
But people
And
nowadays are so against ceremonies
Yeah,
of any kind.
Not in this place. We're quite ceremonial here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you.